Hello, this is Inside News with Dale Matthews. It usually includes Mike Jones, but in this particular case, Mike won't be with us for a little while. He's spending some time with his family. I know that sounds like a political joke, but it's not. He's spending some time with his family for the next 2 weeks, and so we may see him occasionally, but you're kind of stuck with me. I go to the county commissioners meetings, especially the ones in Little Back Room, especially on Thursdays, because that's where all the real action is. For example, this Thursday, they're going to be discussing the ramifications of turning county streets into little parks so that you'll be forced to pay a parking fee in a park, which is actually a street, and they're now declaring that it's a park. This is where the action is. And since I'm telling you about this, and they'll bring it to not tomorrow's Wednesday weekly business session, but the one after that, you may wish to come to that and say what you think about it, because they're just going to do it. Okay. And then they're going to say, well, this is all about think of the children, think of the safety. When you go to the fair in Grants Pass, you may be one of those people, I am, that parks along the side of the street rather than paying for expensive parking inside the fairgrounds or down the street for someone that's, soaking you for a bunch of money for a few days a year. And so you walk that extra block or so, or 2 blocks or 3. So what? Well, that's so dangerous. No, it's not. And besides, even if it was, I assume the danger because I'm parking. What the county commissioners are trying to say with this new thing that they want to pass is it's so dangerous they have to protect you. No. There's such an opportunity to make money off of you that they don't want you being able to park on the street and even in a safe area because you're not paying the fee, which is a tax. So when I saw what was coming up, and you have to be informed about what they're going to talk about in their meetings, or you'll never know. As you watch this show, there's plenty of times you would have no idea that the commissioners are going to talk about this, because even after they made the decision, that's not going to be in the Daily Courier. You're not going to know unless you watch this show, honestly. I mean, there's no other place to go to find out what they're doing. And maybe you don't care, or maybe you do. Maybe you live near a park and you don't like that, or you go to parks and you would want to know. So here's the notice that the commissioners put out. I'll look over to the side just a little bit. Here's the notice that they put out about what they'd be talking about today. I zoomed in a little bit on it. Today, in the Little Back Room, the commissioners talked about, make notes now, FMAG-HMGP. Well, there you go. What more do you really need to know? This is not very informative. At least the one after that, allowing fireworks display in the county. Really? Well, they made the decision today about that, and you might be interested in that. But the one just before it, what the heck is this supposed to mean? At least the second one is in English. FMAG-HMGP is not. Now, that's not very informative, is it? As it turns out, and you never know what they're going to be talking about. And why don't we know what they're going to be talking about? Because if you're like me and you're trying to keep track of, you're watching the show, you're trying to just keep track of what it is that they're doing or what they might inflict on you, you might want to have some idea of what they're talking about so that you can follow along with it, so that maybe you could come to that meeting. Not that they're going to listen to you, not that you can say anything, but you might want to know about it. So FMAG, woohoo, there you go. So what were they talking about? Well, Jenny Hall is the emergency manager, and she was there with the fellow that we were talking about last night, this fellow Streeter that's now the new forestry county forester. Okay, he's the head of the forestry department. I saw him in the hallway this morning, and I said, we played back some tape of you and said some good things last night. Oh, really? I said, yeah. I said that if he continues doing these kinds of things, these common sense kinds of things, as the parks person did, not emergency services, but parks, perhaps there's a brighter future for this county. We're certainly not finding it with the county commissioners. And he was very pleased. Then he went in and said it in this meeting with this mystery title. So what they're talking about is the idea that the county can get some grants. Well, you know Mike's opinion about grants and the strings that are attached. Can get some grants if we can just come up with 25% of the grant. So many times I think, well, you can buy the state of Alaska, and it's only going to cost you $2 billion. That's not much considered the value of the state of Alaska, and you have to come up with it before 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So there you go. What a deal. If we don't have the money, if we're in a fiscal emergency, if we're in a law enforcement emergency, how are we going to come up with 25% for any kind of grants? So here's Ginny Hall explaining to the commissioners, and watch as she hands out documents to them for the very first time they've ever seen them. And certainly we haven't seen the documents either. So we haven't a clue about what this part of the meeting was about and anything about it, because even they didn't have any kind of documentation. Let's watch.
These applications and the grant itself is actually a 75-25 grant, meaning they will cover 75% of the project. So within these applications, we have taken into account how we would come up with our 25%. And Dave can talk a little bit more about the forestry applications if you guys have any questions. The other one is from Soil and Water Conservation District, and they deal with these kinds of grants all the time, and they have multiple different funding streams, and they can use soft match, a lot of different ways to come up with them. So
sorry if that's a little bit loud, but she and Cheryl are very loud in this meeting because they're a little closer to the microphone. And Dave Streeter and from Forestry and Simon Hare are bare whispers in this meeting. And so I turned up the volume a little bit so that you could hear somewhat evenly all the way through the meeting. Go ahead.
Do you guys have any questions?
So, what are the projects with forestry?
So this is the first time that even the commissioners have seen the documentation. Look, one of the things that I've said to that I'd like to do on this show, starting tomorrow, Wednesday, and continuing Friday and next Wednesday, is simply ask the commissioner candidates, simple question, will you agree to obey the law? Especially in meetings. It doesn't do any good, really, to say, are you going to be transparent? They all say they're going to be transparent. Heck, Keith Heck is transparent. It's just not the way he intended. He says what he means. I know we're breaking the law and I don't care. Well, that's transparency because he's telling you that he has no regard for the law at all. And they were found guilty by the state. No, we weren't. Yes, you were. We were, but, you stink. Okay. All right. So, there are reasons behind these laws, and one of them is so that the population, this is so simple, and I feel dumb saying it, but it's not making any impression on them. So we'll have an idea of what's going on because we're paying these guys a bunch of money. There's a lot of money in this room, and it would be nice if we had some clue as to what was happening. So if she's handing out the documents at the last possible moment to the commissioners, sure as heck, we're not going to see these ahead of time. Sitting in on the meeting, I have no idea of what's happening. You're sitting next to me with the camera. You don't know what's happening. None of us have any idea of what's going on. And here's the thing. If you want the minutes of this meeting, one, you're going to have to wait a couple of weeks for them, maybe as long as a month. And that's the minutes being written up by the secretary in the back, but you will not get the documents. The documents that she's now handing out to them. If you want the documents or you want me to get you the documents, I have to pay for them. They're getting free documents and we're paying their salaries and the secretary receives them. And if you want to know what these documents said, you're going to have to pay for them. What the heck kind of deal is this? So you make an extra copy and then I will post it and you'll know what they're talking about. That all stopped with Simon Hare coming into office. As he said to me, it's going to cost you a lot of money to keep up with what we're doing, Mr. Matthews. What do you think about that? Okay, so here she is passing out documents to the commissioners who are seeing them for the very first time.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm just passing out each of the applications so that you guys can look at them.
So my predecessor had actually submitted the initial work on these, and then
I just give you 2 copies of the same one.
Committee's request primarily on the acres that we want to try to get into hazard mitigation form, basically make it fireproof. We had a much larger list associated with that, and then the other project is.
Do you have any idea what's going on in this meeting? I can't keep track of it. There's 2 different conversations going on. These commissioners don't care if you understand what it is that they're talking about. You're paying their salaries. And it doesn't make any difference to them that whether you know what, and you may recall I said at a meeting a couple of different times, we can't hear what you're saying. And Simon Hare's response was, it doesn't matter whether you can hear what we're saying. He didn't mean just me, he meant the entire audience. All that counts is if the commissioners can hear. This is what we're trying to replace. Is that going to be replaced with 2 people from the city council? I don't know. That's why I want to ask them some questions about such things. Not to rake them over the coals, but just to get their general opinion about this. And is it going to do any good? No, it's going to do absolutely no good, because once they get in, if they succumb to the spell that's cast upon them by being in this 100-year-old building, well, then, you know, it doesn't make any difference if it stands up or falls down during an earthquake, because they're not going to be transparent to us. I don't know. And that's one of the things that we should be concerned about. Are we ever going to find out what it is that we're paying for? It would be nice to know. Okay, a little bit more.
For rehabilitation, primarily Douglas County or Douglas Complex fire damaged properties. So our 2 proposals are hazard mitigation on 4 different tracts totaling about 240 acres. That's kind of an equivalent phase. Not very, they're basically properties that we have very explosive fires on them. And then
No, they have a different
the
project.
rehabilitation acres of the Douglas Complex would help us plant basically 800 acres down on the complex, primarily acres that we weren't able to harvest and salvage from. The acres that we were able to harvest and salvage from, those acres will require replant.
Is there any, so this can be used for the Douglas complex as well?
Now, you can see the reason why I turned the volume up, because you can just hear these guys. They're just about right. Look, the purpose of showing you this meeting is not because you're itching to hear about forestry. The purpose of showing you this is to show you this is a fairly typical meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, including the lack of transparency, the phrases that they use, which we don't know much about. They could easily explain some of this stuff to us. It's being recorded by them. They know that I'm there. Of course they do. And they know that we're watching over this, but they're not attempting to make any kind of effort to tell you what the heck is going on. Okay, obviously they're talking about the possibility of grants coming in. As long as we can come up with 25% in our fiscal condition, why, there's all that money out there, and let's go after every dime we can get, and we'll put up the 25%. Really? How are we going to do that? They do discuss that.
Yeah, so our fire was much different than the other fires around the nation, where the Kraus Lane fire did virtually no damage to homes, and it burned quite a bit of it on BLM land. We can only use these dollars on state or county or private land. So
now we can only use these dollars on state or county or private land. Now, okay, think about this for a second. We're the county and we get a grant for which we have to pony up 25%. We're going to spend it on state land. We're going to spend it on private land. I could understand how we're going to spend it on county land. Okay, so when you think about it a little bit more, maybe it makes some sense to help spruce up, sorry for the forestry comment, help spruce up some of the land that's side by side with us, contiguous, so that it doesn't set county land on fire. And it might be nice if some of our county residents, if their homes and their forests surrounding their homes didn't burst into flames. Okay. And so like my camera does at every meeting. And so maybe that makes sense, but one would think, kind of like the Illinois Valley Community Development Organization, IVCDO, that wanted a bunch of money from the county, and they got it because they wanted to put ramps, wheelchair ramps in a state park. The county is putting up money for putting ramps in a state park. In this case, Jenny is saying, Jenny Hall, she's the county's emergency manager. She's saying, but she's not working on the current emergency, of course. She's saying that we could spend grant money and we can borrow it, or we can get a grant if we put up 25%. She's going to say that, you'll see. And that would go then to fixing up and making less fire-prone state property, county property, and private property. Okay, let's think about that, and we'll listen.
We ended up with a very small amount of area that we even could have done anything with. And because there is a lawsuit currently between those property owners and Rough and Ready Mill, we weren't even able to use any of those dollars directly on the ground in the Kraus Lane fire area. However, we went out, surveyed the area. There's really nothing alarming to us as far as looking at damages that would occur post-fire. So we're not in a situation where we needed to try to negotiate anyway.
That area is really still very dense.
It is, and part of Soil and Water Conservation District's grants will allow those dollars to be used on private land. Where we got into some challenges is the 75-25 grant. Usually we have Title III grants, and those are funded at 100%. So having folks needing to come up with that other 25% actually put us in a situation where many of the projects we weren't even able to do. We didn't have a way to carry them out, so there was no way to apply for them. So at least going through Soil and Water, people can come, they'll run the grant program just like what they've done with ODF with the $400 rebate program. They will solicit property owners to have that work done. So that will at least help somewhat. But again, we can't use those dollars on BLM either.
So for me, the priority for the Douglas complex is providing some sort of a buffer between non-treated BLM and our private acres. So reforestation is great, but the propensity for things to burn in an area that isn't treated post-fire is 3 times. And I would imagine that the Douglas complex is at least that. That's the average. So is there any way to do fuels mitigation buffer zones between the BLM land in that area is very contiguous. So is there a way to provide some sort of on private land, just a fuels reduction buffer, or we've treated all of the land, so our land is void of fuels, so to speak, other than the seedlings that are going to be germinating and, flourishing in 3 to 5 years. There's going to be significant fuel load next to all of these dry snags.
Okay, so you have already seen, I'm sure you come up to the conclusion that there's just 2 ways. This buffer zone between the more highly flammable BLM managed land and county land, or even private land, the only way to mitigate that problem would be to put the buffer zone on the county side or somehow convince the Bureau of Land Management to put the buffer zone on their side, or maybe a little of both. But in order to get there, we have to coordinate, not collaborate, as they say in this thing. It smacks of Vichy France in World War II, and not cooperate, but to coordinate with the BLM. And the BLM has basically shown no interest in coordinating with Josephine County. The U.S. Forest Service has been pretty good about this, as a matter of fact. It's the BLM that has not. So what do? There is no answer. They're not going to come up with an answer in this meeting, and sorry about that.
That's what I would like to, I don't know how to do priority, because otherwise we're just putting more fuels in the ground to grow up if we don't have something.
How would we do a buffer since we can't use the money on BLM land? I mean, we have control of our own, but we can't send this on BLM to create a buffer with them, you know what
I'm not exactly sure how that would work. If we have untreated land on our section, or we provide a cat track, you know, on the property line, I don't know.
It has to be adjacent to communities at risk. So
I'm sorry, it has to be what?
the fuel reduction work needs to be adjacent to what's called communities at risk. So it has to actually protect homes.
Okay.
So between our land and BLM land wouldn't qualify. Between our land and private residences would.
I see.
Yeah, this is the rehabilitation work.
So basically, we would be paying to put seedlings in the ground to reforest the areas that had been burned. And by doing that, we may very likely be providing more fuel for the next fire. That's lovely. And so what's the solution to that? One of the solutions is obviously to talk with the BLM and get them to agree to stop making it more possible that the BLM managed land is going to set our land on fire.
I'm so glad there's somebody that can sort these out.
We didn't want to lose out on any of the dollars, but we were quite challenged in putting together a project list where we could all come up with the 25% needed to actually carry out the project and meet FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program requirements.
You didn't exactly spell out who's coming up with the 25%.
That is my understanding, and feel free to correct me when I'm wrong, is that we can satisfy that through current salaries for personnel. So we would use our personnel to administer the contracts. So it's out on the ground, yes.
You can kind of an in-kind.
In kind, anything that we spend on seedlings out of pocket, labor out of pocket, all counts towards our 25% investment.
Okay. This to me is the most interesting part of the meeting. In-kind contributions. Well, soft matching of the grants. All right, so we just listened to the guy last night, to this Dave Streeter, talk about forestry and how he's going to try to cut back on the costs. When I saw him this morning, I said, one of the things that sounds good is that you're looking into not keeping people on the payroll year round, but hiring outside companies to come in seasonally. And he said, yeah, it is a seasonal thing. I said, well, that's a little different than your predecessor. Well, he didn't want to talk about his predecessor, of course, Vic Harris. He just wanted to talk about what he was going to do. But I think it's a more common sense approach to it, rather than keeping people on the payroll and PERS and all the rest of that, right? Right? Okay, so full employment, says the HR director. Let's hire more people. Okay, so this guy seems to have that straight. But let's reconsider what they just said. We can soft match, or we can in-kind match the 25% that we'd have to come up with by providing people that are working on this project, continuing to be employed out of our pocket. So that's not the same in the minds of these commissioners and Streeter as putting up cash directly to the people providing the money. Well, but it's pretty dang close, and that we have to put up cash in order to be able to hire people and say X amount of their time and prove that that amount of the time is equaling 25% of the grant. Now, if you're in the mood to say, just don't accept any grants, I understand you completely. But this is not going to happen with this regime that's running the county. It's just not going to happen. You may recall that when the health director came in, the first thing that she said was, good news, our infant mortality rate is up, and so we're probably going to get more grants. She said it twice. This was no mistake. So they're oriented toward money, money, and money, money, and money, and grants, right? Which is money, tax money that comes out of your other pocket. And they want some of that. And I get the idea, well, if we're going to spend it, let's get part of it back. But in order to get part of it back, we have to put up 25%. And in this case, it's kind of a slight step back and saying, well, we'll provide the people that are going to administer it. Okay, that's probably some inflated rate, I would think, wouldn't you? It's government. And we're going to show that people are working on this project. Well, then that's turning it around and saying, well, people are going to work on this project, right? And so now we have to dance to the grant givers tune, right? What if they said that everybody that you have to hire is a minority of some kind? Just pick your own minority. We don't have that many here, I think. And so everybody would need to be, we need to match that by 25%. How many people would we have to hire? How many people do we need to keep on the payroll in order to hit this? See, so the lofty goal of saying goodbye to some people and only hiring people temporarily during the season kind of gets put in jeopardy by the fact that in order to get this money, which kind of makes you think like, let's turn it down, but since they're going to do it anyway, in order to get the money, we're going to have to keep people employed so that we can then do the soft match or the in-kind match. Every time we turn around, there's another reason why we cannot say goodbye to anybody ever. Because we're not going to get that money. My gosh, just think of what would happen if we didn't get that money.
So untreated, we didn't harvest it because it wasn't merchantable. Are we treating it before we do the reforestation? That would seem to qualify for the fuel reduction element next to reducing a hazard to a community. Or are we just going in and reseeding?
Just primarily reseeding, rehabilitate, trying to get trees back on the ground rather than relying on nature to take care of itself.
So instead of relying on nature to take care of itself, as he's just said, we're simply going to plant the seedlings. Are they going to be treated so they may not also burst into flames? No. We're just going to plant them. I certainly don't know everything about this, but that shows you where we're headed. And this is indicative of all the meetings that I see back there. I just wanted to share pretty much one continuous, well, it's not continuous because I keep interrupting it, but to let you see the decisions that are being made all the way through here. Now, did you feel while you were watching this that you had any input on what their conclusions should be? You had as much input watching the show as I had, because I can just sit there and the camera's running next to me and you're watching this now with a time delay, but you have just as much or lack of as much input on these decisions that they're making. And you might say, hey, wait a minute, what about this? You can't do that because they're not going to allow you to speak about this subject. You may get 3 minutes after they've already made up their mind. It's just ceremonial. Here's the point at which they're forming their initial impressions. And it used to be in these meetings that you could speak up. If you had the guts to show up to a meeting, you could speak up. Simon Hare put an end to that. And the others are fully, and you can't ask this guy any questions either. I mean, I talked to him for a couple of minutes out in the hallway, and then Ginny Hall came and grabbed the guy up and took him into the little back room. So he'd sit the rest of the time in there, not sitting out here talking to me. What a disaster that would be. If you watch this show, it would be a tragedy. Well, if you talk with this guy, he might ask you a question or two about what the heck is going on.
Possibly turn it into brush patches.
Are there fuels buffers included in that proposal?
There's no fuels involved with the rehabilitation work. Going back to what Jenny addressed, that the fuels work has to be in adjacent to communities at risk. And that doesn't mean that, it's just rehabilitation of burn acres.
Because we have a forestry program here and they're not solely funded by federal dollars, we actually have had a much easier time than other counties around Oregon being able to have some work done, because that 25% is already in the forestry budget. So that's hugely advantageous for us to be able to then, really what we're getting to do is to add a whole lot more money into that program and have a great benefit on county land.
Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just see this guy making a presentation at the budget committee yesterday? You watched it? Do you recall him talking about how 25% is being squirreled away into some part of his budget so that it can be used for matches? Maybe he did. I didn't catch that. Okay. And so you may have heard many things that I didn't hear. I don't recall hearing any of that. So if that's there, and it may very well be, there really wasn't much said about that, was there?
And then the project that the Soil Water Conservation District turned in was for approximately 25% of the funds, over $100,000. They're currently involved with the SRS work that we're doing, which is 100% by grant. There's no match involved with it, but it's for Firewise communities, so they actually have to organize as a community to get that work performed. And I believe the Soil Water Conservation District's objective with this portion of their grant is to be able to go out and work with individual landowners and treat those acres rather than having to rely on the community effort.
For Soil and Water, they do a really great job of tracking in-kind time, and their plan was to work with each individual homeowner to say, well, what would work with you? What would work for you if the homeowner buys plants, if the homeowner actually goes out and does some of the work on their property? All of those things count. So there's really a multitude of ways to come up with that 25%. And again, my understanding from Michelle and Randy is that they're quite familiar with working within those confines, and so they just get creative and make it work. But like Dave said, this allows them to do some fuel work in that home ignition zone on those properties for folks that aren't part of the Firewise community, which is that requirement for Title III.
And I don't believe we would be involved, Josephine County Forestry would be involved with that work like they are on the SRS.
No, their plan, and I think they put it in the grant application, their plan is to use contractors to accomplish the work where appropriate.
Now, doesn't that sound smarter than what the county looks like it's contemplating? So these people have a way to do this. They're going to get the homeowners involved because it's their property after all. They already have a way to do this in-kind contributions, which is the same thing. And they've got experience with this, and they're talking about outside contractors. And so what is the county going to do that's different than that?
But again, these can be very individualized projects with the homeowners, where the homeowners can do the work or some of the work as well.
When's this application you began?
I believe it needs to be in by August. However, that we need to have actual applications into FEMA by August. So we're really down to the wire as far as getting our pre-applications up to the state.
Look, we're always down to the wire. I was surprised, almost shocked at this meeting that she didn't insist, as so many other department heads did, that you have to sign this by the end of this meeting. Because that often happens, where it's the first time they've ever seen the documentation. You need to sign it right now, or time is running out, and there's no time left. At least in this case, there's a little bit of time. There's a little bit of time for example, for you to step forward if you care about this issue. This is more about the meeting and what happens at meetings than the particular subject this time. I've already said that. But at least it gives some amount of time to think about it. I have been there, and you've seen the tape where the commissioners have signed off on something that they just read and still don't understand. Oh, we'll read it later, and voted on it.
Because our initial round of projects were all denied.
I said the soil and water one has Cave Junction, Williams, Wolf Creek, and other small communities within Josephine County, all of which experience issues.
Right.
What?
Is there any coordination going on with what BLM is doing? Does it
No.
make sense to do something?
Soil and water.
Coordinated effort?
Soil and Water was hopeful that they would be able to put some of these dollars on the ground out where they have another BLM project going. However,
Why not just be straight with this? No, there's no coordination at all. Oh, Soil and Water is hopeful that they may be able to. That's typical of a government meeting.
these grants didn't really, because of the restrictions and the 75-25, we weren't really in a position to where we could collaborate the way that I wish that we could have.
Seems like you could leverage the BLM to be doing work in areas that prioritize under this, to say, look, we're doing something here, why don't you guys do something on the other side of the line?
Now, that's a smart thing. Okay, so if we're going to work here and not up here and not down there, if we're going to work within this, can we talk to BLM and suggest or encourage them to not work up here or work down here, but work in a somewhat contiguous area? Is it possible that if we plant a bunch of things here or do a bunch of amelioration of the possibility of the forest bursting into fire on our side, that we can get the BLM to at least consider working somewhere near the same area? Here's the answer.
Oops. And we actually, get more bang for the buck.
And there has been a little bit of that in terms of the mitigation properties that we buy deed on government lands, but that's certainly something that should be shared with them.
Yeah.
And maybe we could help steer them to those areas that
I
have a better project.
45,000 acres of untreated.
Here's something else that may occur to you. Wouldn't it have been nice if not only we had been informed, the citizens, about what this meeting was about, but maybe invite somebody from the BLM to come and sit there at the table and listen to what they're saying. And if not, make a deal with them on the spot because they don't feel like cooperating, maybe go back and talk with their guys. Or they could say at the end of this meeting, let's draw up a little document about what we've talked about, and let's make sure that BLM gets it with return receipt requested, and we'll ask them this question. Nobody's going to say that at this meeting. Oh, well, we certainly do hope that one of these days. What?
Just absolute waste.
I specifically spoke with the Fuels Committee about this grant, and they didn't see an opportunity to collaborate based on the requirements of this grant and the requirements of the other grants that they typically work. they have set their priorities several years in advance, and that is done in collaboration with the county and the state, as they're looking at where those priority areas are, and that's all based on our risk assessment. So there's definitely a lot of thought that goes into it. In this particular case, getting dollars on the ground was really only feasible because of the 75-25 going.
That's besides the point, 75-25. All right. As stupid as this is, okay, I'm saying ahead of time it's stupid. If if BLM is entirely, as she said, not going to cooperate, they see no chance of that, and they're going to do it up here, then is it possible, for the county to say, well, all right, we're going to do it up here too? No, nobody's going to talk about that. Well, we've got this area down here. Can they be encouraged to do it here? No, they say they don't want to. They want to do it up here. Great, then we'll do it up here. Is it just me? I don't like that solution, but at least we're collaborating. That's what we'd be doing, and not coordinating. We'd be collaborating with them, with the result being that we have less timber burned, less lives put at stake, less property destroyed. Aren't those some of the priorities of this commission of county elected officials?
Through soil and water, or looking at doing something with forestry. No one else was able to come up with that 25%.
I'm not saying that it needs to go to the letter of the grant. It meets the intent. Because it says here on page 2 of this one, rehabilitation of wildfire damage land project, Bureau of Land Management has several light projects adjacent to and in the immediate vicinity of this project. So it sounds as though, at least that's what you're saying, that there is some sort of a coordinated effort.
Now, that's very interesting, and that went by so quickly. It says in this thing that was written up by Vic Harris, according to the way Simon Hare is reading it, that one of the reasons to do this project where it is because there are similar projects by the BLM done in the same general area. That's what the initial request said, according to Simon Hare, written up by Vic Harris, the former county forester. As it turns out, the truth is, now that it looks like we might get the grant, it's not right there after all. It's not in a similar area after all. We saw this with Cheryl Walker when she went to the Infrastructure Finance Authority and said, here's the people that we have on board and let's do it. Boy, everybody in the area loves this idea. And as it turns out, that was a lie because they weren't on board. And when I went to the school board meeting for the county, and I told them that she had mentioned because she said it on tape, the Infrastructure Finance Authority, that they were on board, they went, no, we're not. No, we're not. So here's another indication. It's kind of like what I say to people when they come to a weekly business session and they go over to the commissioners after the meeting and all the recordings are turned off and they engage them in conversation. Look, the commissioners are more likely than not, to break the law. That's illegal. They're not supposed to be talking with people or making deals or taking votes in a parking lot. They're not supposed to do that kind of stuff. So I will often say nicely to that person, by the way, that's kind of tempting them a little bit. I mean, people are people. They're human beings. And when you come up and you talk to them, Keith X is going to listen. He knows it's against the law, but he's doing it anyway. He already told us his plan. And so in this case, here was someone who, and with Cheryl Walker and also with Vic Harris, according to what Simon Hare just said, who wrote up something in order to be able to get a grant, and it was simply not true. Well, you get the grant and all you have to do is lie. Or maybe it looked like that at the time. Right, sure it did. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to the state. Stop breaking the law. Okay, a little bit more here.
Or they're treating everywhere and we're treating next to them. So this is on the rehabilitation of wildfire damage.
And that is verbiage that Vic put in there. And
now we don't get to see that because I didn't pay for these multiple copies of this. They're reading it. It was handed out to them, but we don't get to see it unless I pay for it and then bring it to you. And so this is why so often I depend on them reading something aloud, which is a dang poor way of figuring out what's going on, because Simon here is right. In order to find out what we're doing, transparency, Keith Heck was running on transparency, why then I have to pay for it so that I can tell you about it, even though they could just as easily have made 4 copies. Easy. We're paying for the toner, we're paying for the, you know that already.
You should
And the
be
BLM
familiar.
more than on every land.
Yeah.
It's just that, I think in general it's 5 to 10% typically of the fire damage lands that they actually do work on.
Are we coordinating with them at all on our neighboring lands and trying to emphasize fuels reductions?
To the degree possible, every time we get an opportunity to talk to them, bringing up the good neighbor policy with the government and stuff, and how the lack of management on their land certainly puts private and other public lands at risk.
I would prefer the question, are they cooperating with us to these ends?
No.
Now, there's an honest guy. She said to us just a couple of minutes ago, well, we're trying to, and this guy, when they asked him, are they coordinating with us? No. Thank you, Mr. Streeter. Thank you.
No, not to any significant degree, no. Just other than basically transportation systems is about the extent of our cooperation.
Now, one of the things I said to him out in the hallway was, this wasn't very nice maybe, but, I was being polite to him. I said, at the moment, you're just saying common sense things and speaking directly. One of the things I hope, I said to him, would be that you don't succumb to the pressures inside the courthouse to couch everything in diplomatic language and kind of lie to us. Because it's refreshing to see somebody that's just straight with us and doesn't try to say everything in PR terms. We'll see if he can stand up to the pressure.
Okay. I think I would have preferred to read these ahead of time.
No kidding! Even Simon's saying it. I think I would have preferred to read these ahead of time. Yes, thank you. He would have preferred, but it's obvious that it would be nice if we get a chance to see them at all, even after they're presented to these guys. We're not going to get a chance to see them unless we pay for them.
Formulating kind of a structure.
Shall we schedule it Thursday and I'll give you time to read it?
Yeah, we're gonna have to move this forward on weekly business session, or how do you need approval? You just need approval to go forward.
It's simply a consensus.
You don't need a weekly business session. Why would you bring this up at a weekly business session? I mean, just go ahead and just do it. I mean, you can just move it ahead by consensus.
Yep.
We can apply.
We can apply. Yeah. So it's even something that you could take some time to read, and all 3 of you could send me an email individually that says, yep.
Okay. All right. Now let's see if that matches your perception of transparent government. Here's what Ginny Hall just suggested. Why, you can give me the nod now, and we'll go ahead and apply for it. And then you can read it at your leisure, and then you can send Ginny Hall an email individually saying individually you agree. This is what happened in Lane County. Very close to almost exactly the same kind of issue. What they were doing is the commissioners were coming to a consensus through a third person, a fourth person. That's not transparency. That's not communicating with the public. That's not even telling us what was going to happen at this meeting. That's not even letting us see the documents. Now, this time it's about forestry. Maybe you don't give a flip about forestry, but next time it may be something where you really do care about it.
I'm okay with this.
Well, I think the consensus is, yeah, we're okay with this until we have a reason to say no, because we can't get to a decision even. singularly, collectively.
Right.
Okay.
So, why don't we just read it over and then bring it back Thursday? And that way we'll have had a chance to read them.
I would appreciate your input as to do you support these and why? Because you have much more on-site involvement than I ever would have. But if if you read these things, it's page 2 on the basic project specification.
And I'll give you an opportunity to read those, but in my understanding of them, the answer is yes. They'll get a 75% improvement for a 25% investment.
Okay.
Now, one other thing to keep in mind about this, because we're running out of time, I wanted you to see as much of this as possible. One other thing to keep track of here is that we're talking about getting funds into the county. And then one of the potentials here is that the county would then be paying to mitigate the fire damages for private individuals and their property. Now, then it goes beyond the realm, doesn't it, of county forestry. It's now taking taxpayer money on a state and federal basis and spending it through the largesse of the county commissioners on individual private homes and properties. Should the county commissioners be in the role of picking winners and losers? They love to do that, and they have been doing it. Oh, they don't love to. Yes, they do. And isn't that what this is really about? Part of this is about private ownership of lands and keeping it fire safe. Okay, by routing dollars from outside the county to those individual property owners. You are going to have to come to your own conclusion about what you think about that. And should that be the kind of thing that our county government is doing to turn that fire hose on individuals who know enough to ask for it and seeing that they get some kind of mitigation at the cost of everybody else? One last thing I wanted to add in, because there just isn't enough time to play that segment, is they did come to a conclusion today about whether the county will allow fireworks displays to take place on inside the county, outside of fire districts. Now, there's one in Williams, there's one in Cave Junction, there's certainly one in Grants Pass, but in this case, somebody had asked planning. And they were all mystified about why planning. I don't know why not planning. They said at this meeting that this was the first time that this had been asked. I don't know. But I remember last year, Cheryl Walker didn't want any fireworks displays at all in any part of the county. Well, this time they're saying, well, but think about it. It's going to be the 4th of July. You know what? Maybe it's just me, but I think it's the 4th of July every year. Well, that's within the fire danger area. You know what? I think also that the 4th of July always falls within the fire danger time of year, doesn't it? I mean, it's the 4th of July. It doesn't even matter what day of the week it is. It's the 4th. So they came up with the conclusion without having any public input that they would not allow 4th of July displays. What is a display? Is a display if you go out on your driveway and set off some fountains, set off 15 fountains? No, according to Cheryl Walker, that's not a display. A display is bigger. What does that mean? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows what that means. But she'll know a display if she sees one, I guess. And so she's going to issue a press release from the commissioners without a vote and without any public input, again, this year also, that they're not going to allow 4th of July displays on any property that falls within the purview of the county. Why would they wait for some kind of input from the public? They know best, really. If you think about it, they were elected. 62 votes in the case of Cheryl Walker. Thanks for joining me tonight. And tomorrow I may or may not have a guest. We're going to find out. Goodbye.